On September 4th, 1995, WCW Monday Nitro beamed out for the very first time, and with it came the advent of the wrestling boom period we know today as the Monday Night Wars. The first Nitro ran unopposed due to the US Open tennis coverage preempting Monday Night Raw for the week. And with that roadblock in place, Eric Bischoff knew that he could have the undivided attention of the general wrestling audience for Nitro's initial rollout. To leave his mark on the night, Bischoff served up some unusual sights and sounds for the curious fan, including a wrestling ring sat inside a shopping mall, former NFL roughneck Steve McMichael on commentary, and WWF Superstar Lex Luger in a button-up shirt sauntering down the aisle. Quite the dramatic turn of events. In being given the Monday Night TNT time slot by no greater authority than Ted Turner himself, Bischoff was being put into the strongest possible position to lead WCW into battle with Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation. The only problem was, with that positioning came crucially high expectations. Bischoff and his top officials were being tasked with taking WCW, which hadn't once been profitable during Turner's 6+ years as company owner, and jockeying for market supremacy with the WWF. The same WWF who, as the territories died off one by one, remained unchallenged as the gold standard of mainstream American wrestling. The WWF was a household name, and it was merchandised to a degree that would make Gene Simmons proudly nod. And meanwhile, WCW, even at their absolute strongest, may as well have been Brand X situated on the bottom shelf at the local grocery store. Even if the WWF was presently in far less than mint condition following scandal and audience turnover, it was still going to take a hell of a lot of force and firepower for WCW to move the Eternal Champion from its perch. So Bischoff and his closest confidants put together what they hoped was a winning strategy to make Nitro as formidable as possible. Part of said strategy stemmed from a focus group study on what the potential audience wanted to see on a wrestling program, and the results shouldn't be terribly shocking. They wanted more action, more surprises, more of a sense that anything could happen at any time. And since WWF had become accustomed to taping up to 4 weeks of Raw in a single night to save on costs, Bischoff knew that Nitro had to be live. Because as the old saying goes, anything can happen on live TV. But what about the surprises? A cataclysmic shock would be the perfect thing to kick off the Nitro era with a bang, but what sort of surprise could Bischoff even cook up? Well, in August 1995, weeks before the first Nitro would be broadcast from Bloomington, Minnesota's Mall of America, he received a game-changing phone call from one of his top stars, Sting. And given what Bischoff was looking for, the call was something close to divine intervention. Sting had long been best friends with the man he won his second WCW World Heavyweight title from, Lex Luger. For close to 5 years, the two ran in the same circles in WCW, dating back to when it was still Jim Crockett Promotions. To have seen Luger was to understand why promoters salivated over him as a top guy. The man looked like he was chiseled out of stone. Lex complemented his Greek god physique with a flowing blonde mane, putting him on a comparable physical standing with someone like Hulk Hogan. And shot callers understandably couldn't ferry him up the card fast enough. For several years, WCW teased pulling the trigger on Luger as the next top champion, only to pull it back, having him fall short against his arch-rival Ric Flair several times. But by 1991, they were finally set to hold Luger's championship coronation, and they did, at that year's Great American Bash. The only problem was that Vice President Jim Herd made a complete mess of everything in the run-up to the pay-per-view, firing world champion Flair 2 weeks before Luger could beat him for the belt. In semi-roundabout fashion, Luger got the strap anyway, but his reign proved less than thrilling, especially when it came equipped with a heel turn that was as sudden as an aneurysm. And after dropping the belt to Sting in February 1992, Luger departed from WCW bound for Vince McMahon's sanctum. But not to wrestle. Instead, he joined McMahon's ill-conceived World Bodybuilding Federation, co-hosting the group's weekend TV series while preparing for a guest appearance at their June pay-per-view. But unfortunately, he never did get his chance to pose as he was badly injured and nearly killed in a motorcycle accident shortly before the event. And then by the time he'd healed, the WBF was deader than the aforementioned territories. So he made the logical transition back to wrestler in early 1993. He entered the WWF as a self-absorbed heel called the Narcissist, complete with a full-length mirror which he used to admire his own musculature before and after matches. And as the company was losing the likes of Ric Flair back to WCW, and the Ultimate Warrior and Davey Boy Smith to drug-related firings, McMahon's entity desperately needed to shore up some star power. Luger wasn't even a year removed from reigning as WCW champion, so he was a natural choice to help patch up the thinning upper card. But the Narcissist character didn't even last 6 months, as on the 4th of July in 1993, Luger was suddenly turned babyface. In what was a clear attempt to fill the gaping hole left by the all-powerful do-gooder Hulk Hogan, WWF booked Luger to be the new Hulkster, draped in as much put-on Americana as possible. To spell out this change, Luger was a surprise entrant in a public body slam challenge held by the America-hating WWF champion Yokozuna. And where every proud American contestant before him failed, Luger, bedecked in red, white and blue, stormed the ring and overturned the 500-plus pound Yoko to win the contest. With this turn, all-American Lex Luger got the big push, and with it, a star-spangled banner bedecked tour bus labelled the Lex Express. It was patently obvious that the company was going all in on rocketing Luger to the WWF Championship, until they didn't. Questionable booking and curious alterations saw Luger fall short of the crown, earning a hollow count-out win over Yokozuna at the 1993 SummerSlam, and then failing in a second bid at WrestleMania 10 the following year. After spending the previous summer making Luger out to be the second coming, WWF now had Luger configured as a hapless choke artist. And for the next year plus, he meandered in and out of feuds with Crush and Tatanka, far adrift from the main event tier that a player of his assumed prestige presumably belonged on. At the time of Sting's phone call to Bischoff, Luger was part of a promising but ultimately go-nowhere tag team with Davey Boy Smith called the Allied Powers. But there was a much more interesting tidbit about Luger's WWF residency that Sting wanted to pass along to his boss. Preceding the call to Bischoff, Sting chatted with his best friend Luger about apparently humdrum matters, just two chums shooting the breeze. And that is when Luger casually mentioned that he hadn't been under contract with the WWF for about 6 months. This revelation floored Sting, who couldn't believe that a star of Luger's caliber was on some handshake per night deal with somebody like McMahon, who was notorious for making sure his talents were securely tethered to the Federation. As Luger remembers it, close to a year earlier, he kept his contract from automatically rolling over another year because he wanted to renegotiate. And he had all the intentions of re-signing with the WWF, but he was looking for a deal that was friendlier to his career desires, namely commercial opportunities and a chance to do something bigger in the world of bodybuilding and fitness. For reasons that are not entirely clear, while Luger's attorney went back and forth with the company on the specifics of the deal, it just never got done. When the old contract lapsed, Luger continued performing for McMahon under the impression that one day there would be a new contract for him to put the ink to. But after 6 months, it just hadn't happened. Until that theoretical day came up, Luger was content to continue wrestling for McMahon on a nightly deal, and all the while, the door behind him was conspicuously unlocked. Flabbergasted, Sting relayed these details to Bischoff, thinking this would be a great way to once again work with one of his closest friends. Bischoff, however, was conflicted. On the one hand, he knew that an all-too recent WWF star such as Luger strolling out on a WCW program could be just the cosmic jostle his show needed, and on the other, he didn't much care for the total package. Bischoff, who worked with Luger in WCW earlier that decade, later wrote, "Overall, I thought he was an arrogant ass. He treated people badly and he had too high an opinion of himself, and I never really thought much of his talent. Between his lack of talent and a piss-poor attitude, I had no interest in him whatsoever, and I told Sting that." Sting remained persistent, however, and Bischoff admits that it was only out of respect for the loyal face-painted headliner that he even agreed to meet with Luger. When Bischoff arranged the powwow, he demanded secrecy from the man currently situated in WWF. Nobody could know that they were talking, and Bischoff meant it. When the three came together for this crucial meeting, it was in the garage of Sting's home. Luger, by this time, was keen to jump back to WCW, probably figuring that something as left field as the Beatles reuniting would happen before a finalized WWF contract would end up in his lap. Bischoff was feeling decidedly less warm and issued some demands that might prove hard for Luger to accept. And if Luger said no to his non-negotiable ultimatums, screw him, he had little time for Lex anyway. First, he had to agree to accept an annual salary of just $150,000, which was staggeringly less than what Luger was used to earning. Secondly, he couldn't give any sort of notice to McMahon whatsoever. Only Bischoff, Sting, and Luger knew about this plan, and if Vince or anybody else found out, that would mean that Lex opened his mouth, and all hope of Bischoff making Luger's debut a surprise would be ruined. And as hard a bargain as Bischoff drove, Luger was that serious about returning that he accepted the terms. He was going to prove his loyalty. In the weeks ahead, Luger remained a fixture on WWF cards. At house shows, he and Davey Boy Smith lost in tag matches, mostly to title holders Owen Hart and Yokozuna. In those instances, WWF ran the same angle in different cities, having the British Bulldog disgustedly walk out on Lex in the latter stages of the match. Smith was being groomed for a heel turn, with Luger positioned as his nemesis for the months ahead. After Bulldog solidified his heel turn on an episode of Raw by double-crossing world champion Diesel, Luger appeared at the August 27th SummerSlam only 8 nights before Nitro's premiere to help even the score during the main event. It was Luger's final televised appearance for WWF, something very few people knew at the time. Luger wrestled in untelevised matches at the next 2 days' worth of TV tapings, before setting out on the Labor Day weekend house show loop in northern New York and eastern Canada. On Friday, September 1st, however, just 3 days before the Nitro premiere, Luger reportedly called Sting with some startling news. Sometime since that secret meeting in his friend's garage, Luger had gotten a contract offer from Vince, though said contract didn't address some issues that Luger had wanted sewn up to his liking. And so he wanted to know where Bischoff's offer stood. Come Sunday, 1 day before Luger was scheduled as the grand reveal on the maiden Nitro, Bischoff held his ground on the terms he was offering. Take it or leave it salary, and speak not a word of this to anybody. Luger, feeling that this was the option that had more upside, reaffirmed to Bischoff that he was in. After the Sunday night show in New Brunswick, the rest of the crew flew home for a few days of R&R, but covertly, Luger boarded a Monday morning flight bound for Minneapolis. And upon arrival, he was escorted via van to a hotel separate from the other wrestlers. Once he was brought to the building shortly before going on live, he was taken to an isolated area with a towel draped over his head. To any clueless onlookers, this might have looked like a bizarre kidnapping, but given what was about to transpire, there was no way that Vince McMahon would have any interest in paying the ransom. Instead, Vince and all the viewing world found out what only Luger, Bischoff, and Sting and some tight-lipped crew members already knew. That the total package had slipped out from under McMahon's thumb, returning to the closest thing resembling competition to WWF there was. As Luger strode out in front of the astonished crowd at the Mall of America, silently confronting old rivals Sting and Ric Flair from afar, he became the first shot. The shot heard round the world in the brand new Monday Night War.